Welcome back to Business Talk here on businesstech.co.za, the show where we try to make sense of a world that seems determined to test our resilience daily. Whether it's cyber criminals, water restrictions, or the existential dread of trying to get through to a call center, I think resilience is no longer some corporate buzzword out there. It's actually a survival mechanism. And today we're going beyond survival. We're unpacking what real holistic organizational resilience truly looks like in an era where we've got all of these compounding risks, and helping us make our way through this increasingly unpredictable environment is someone who knows the terrain well. Lutfiyyah Ahmed, who's a head of advisory at Resilient Innovations, a cybersecurity specialist, privacy attorney, and a leader in developing resilient strategies that actually work for South African businesses in the South African context. So Lutfiyyah, it's great to have you back with us. Let's just get straight into it from a definitional perspective. Organizational resilience, it gets used a lot these days, but you've made the point that it's quite different from traditional risk management. So what does resilience actually mean in 2025, and how is it evolving beyond the old identify, measure, mitigate playbook?
Sure, thanks, Michael. It's very overused, organizational resilience. I think a lot of people used to call organizational resilience business continuity, and we're trying to really shift away from that terminology. I think the key from a traditional risk management view was, again, the IT dynamic with cybersecurity or IT involved in disaster recovery and business continuity. And organizational resilience is really about the bigger picture. So it is more the full life cycle of the enterprise risk management, really. When we're looking at that organizational resilience and the bigger scope, really, we are then looking at identifying the risks within each business area and not just your IT department.
And if you look at South African organizations in particular, yes, business continuity, as you used to think of it, was just ensuring you've got maybe a redundant power solution, maybe a redundant phone line. But now we're facing this layered risk environment. It's not just the infrastructure. It's not just the cyber that we've discussed. There's governance, there's extreme weather, there's even the threat of social instability. If we look a couple of years ago and what happened with the July riots, for example. So you've got all of these layers. Why is holistic resilience across people and systems and processes and culture becoming so critical in that kind of environment?
So, from a South African perspective, over the years, I think, again, maybe me coming from a legal background, I will focus a lot on the change in the regulatory landscape. We've seen POPIA come out, the compliance date come and go, and now a lot more enforcement happening. Then we see the FSCA and SARB-PA release the joint standards on cybersecurity and cyber resilience. So we see a lot more regulatory requirements. And when a lot of organizations are tackling these, they're coming from a point of view of regulatory fatigue, and they're not looking at the purpose and the point to address things like South Africa being one of the biggest targets from a cyber crimes perspective. And again, when you're looking at all of these overlapping legislation, looking at it in silos becomes a very dangerous area to tread in. Because now you're going to have maybe a cybersecurity team trying to implement cybersecurity requirements without a legal team or a records management team. And then you have a lot of duplicates of the same type of thing, just done a little bit differently. And when we're looking from that organizational resilience and that holistic perspective, it is really about working together. So doing away with that siloed approach, and I think we overuse we're working in silos, but in bigger organizations, it sometimes becomes easier to eat the elephant in pieces. But then we're missing the bigger picture of that holistic view and why we're doing it in the first place.
Would you say that's where some of the most significant gaps or blind spots are for how organizations are thinking about resilience today, and that they're not looking at it with this kind of multidisciplinary teams lens on?
Definitely. So I think one of the biggest gaps definitely is going to be from that siloed approach, where you're not working together, leveraging efficiencies, understanding the risk at that holistic level. I think that's where a lot of gaps start filtering in. Then you have things like I like using the example of privacy impact assessments and then business impact assessments, because you're basically looking at a process that's critical without the information, and then in a privacy lens with the information. So combining stuff like that is so powerful, because then you having it that holistic view, and you're not duplicating efforts and looking at one thing from two different lenses with two different teams, but rather working together. So I think little things like that, traditionally we would do it separately, because ISO 22301 says do a business impact analysis. Privacy legislation requires personal information impact assessments to be done. But then we missed the ball, and why don't we just combine something like that? Because we're essentially looking at very much the same things and looking at the impact on our business and our processes.
And then you avoid duplicating all of that work, and often when you duplicate work, it means raising costs, raising times to completion sometimes as well. I like that, doing a more privacy impact assessment through the business. Now, we spoke recently about cyber simulations, but today we're going to widen the lens a little bit. When organizations run resilience stress tests, be it business continuity drills or operational failovers or simulating a crisis, what shifts in their understanding, and why do you see these exercises as so foundational to enterprise-wide resilience?
So the sort of core purpose is to identify your gaps. But beyond just identifying gaps in your plan practically, there is also that dynamic of the more you practice, the more perfect you are with your response and your preparedness. And in having those practice exercises through the simulations, you do also just build a bit of muscle memory. So you're quicker to respond because now you know your plan so well. And I think the other aspect that comes into having these regular simulations is there's such a big shift in the cyber threat landscape. Regulatory changes are coming in quite quickly as well. So adapting your plans to also be fit for purpose for the current time is very important as well. I think preparedness is only as prepared as you can be in your environment, and doing those constantly, you can adapt to something new, and you also are usually simulating something that's quite topical. So you are staying very relevant when you're conducting the simulation exercises.
Do you get pushback often on this from executives who say, well, I'd love to run simulations and tests and drills all the time, but we simply, we can't afford to take our team off a particular project. We don't have the time, we don't have the capacity to do this. I suppose the counter is, well, I mean, if you don't do it, you're opening yourself up to all kinds of risks. So, I mean, you choose which one you want. But what kind of response do you generally get when you sit down with executives and you start fleshing out the need and the necessity of doing these kinds of very hands-on simulations?
I definitely a lot of pushback. I think executives don't tend to realize the benefit until they've been in a simulation exercise. So it does. I think it does boil down to, oh, this is another awareness session. It's not going to benefit me in the way I want to, or this is something so far down the line in maturity, we aren't quite there to do something like this. But you can really do it at any point. I think the overconfidence or over reliance in I have good documented plans and that's enough is something that's also one of the biggest downfalls of organizations. You think, oh, I've got this consultant or this law firm that's done this amazing policy document or plan for me. That's as much as I need. But actually practically applying those plans is very important. I think we like using the example whenever we go to our clients of these 50-page plans, and then the action points start on like page 40. Who's actually going to practically be using that? So bringing that practicality in through those simulation exercises and understanding the value from the get-go is very important.
It reminds me of that old Mike Tyson phrase that everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face and then it goes out the window. You've got to put yourself in the trenches. You've got to see how you'll respond, how your team will respond, and kind of stress test the organizations if you're really committed to building that kind of resilience. So, right, if you're a leader watching this today, you're convinced and you're wondering, but okay, where do I begin? What practical kind of measurable steps can organizations take to strengthen their resilience in a way that's sustainable?
So most of this discussion has been around holistic. And I think a lot of organizations struggle with fragmented pieces here and there of risk registers, not being an enterprise wide risk register, for example. So I am such an advocate for a unified framework. Do it at a central level, unify your resilience framework, have everyone put a piece of their business into that. And I think that's going to be your best starting point. A lot of times we have fragmented compliance requirements and then we're not consolidating all of that together. That's going to help you deduplicate efforts. It's going to help you identify where your actual risks lie. Because at the end of the day, especially with your C-suite, the main thing that's driving what the budget goes into or what initiatives are prioritized is your risk-based approach. And your enterprise risk register being then that unified view is going to be very, very powerful as a starting point.
I like that unified framework and also just, building a culture of resilience, because I think it's often seen as something that may be a technical or an operational topic, but increasingly, and as you've outlined in our last couple of conversations, it seems to be very much a cultural and a leadership issue too. So how do you get people all the way from the executive C-suite to your frontline staff aligned around resilience as a shared responsibility?
So something I've seen that works quite nicely in organizations is the introduction of very specialized roles like business information officers or privacy champions, or sort of a dual role between that, where someone that specializes actually sitting with the business to adapt the resilience or the cyber into a very business focused unit. And then that collective then comes together to bring the risks to light. So it's that specialized function in a business function. So it's like meeting the best of both worlds, really.
If you were to ball gaze, and we're all doing it, it's that time of year where we look back on 2025 and we try and predict, which sometimes can be a bit of a fool's game, what's going to happen in the next 12 months. If you were to look ahead 12 to 24 months, what do you see as the next frontier of resilience? What should organizations be preparing for today that they might not even have on their radar screens yet?
I think being tentative to the changing landscape, to the cyber threat landscapes, we tend to focus on what we can identify. I think it's very difficult to move to unknown, and treating that is again, yeah, very difficult. So keeping up to date with threat intelligence, keeping up to date with what's relevant in the news is very, very important. Not just to know it, but to prepare for it. I think often we say, oh, yes, did you see this in the news, this breach or that breach? But how are you applying that into your own environment? I think as we discussed in a previous session, there is a large number of data breaches. So we can probably see that data breaches going to be increasing and on the high within the next years as well. So preparing from a data perspective, recovery, test. I think the more you test, the more you adapt. That's again the major shift from business continuity traditionally to organizational resilience, the adaptability. So keep on pushing for that next. Don't just stay stagnant.
I think it's a question of when, not if, you're going to suffer some kind of attack or data breach. And I think that's where we'll leave it for today, because it's a solid reminder that resilience isn't about predicting every crisis, but what you can do and what you can control as an executive team is preparing your organization so well that you can respond to any of the myriad of possible crises that could befall your organization. A big thank you to Lutfiyyah Ahmed from Resilient Innovations for helping us rethink what it really means to build organizations that can withstand and even thrive in an era defined by all of that uncertainty. Remember, you can catch this episode and more on businesstech.co.za. I'm Michael Avery. Stay resilient, stay prepared, and remember, hope is not a strategy. Until next time.